As some of you guys know, I've recently been playing the new Battle for Azeroth expansion, and it's my first foray into modern WoW since Cataclysm. I've been playing almost exclusively vanilla servers for the past 5+ years, so it's been pretty interesting to experience BFA from the perspective of somebody that's missed the last 3 or 4 expansion packs worth of content.
Whoa. Whoa! Whoa! Holy shit. That's a lot of shit I forgot I had.
Obviously, the game has changed a ton since I last played retail, and it's pretty much unrecognizable compared to vanilla, so I tried my best to approach BFA with an open mind and treat it like a brand new game. So, without further ado, here are my thoughts. I'll start with the positives. The art style is fantastic. The overall feel of the new zones is much closer to a traditional Warcraft fantasy vibe than the past few expansions have been. The general aesthetic will definitely be appealing to old school players. Zuldazar, shown here, is honestly one of the most beautiful zones I have ever seen. BFA definitely hits the mark when it comes to the art style and the overall feel of these new areas. The soundtrack is also phenomenal. Another thing I was really pleased by is the fact that the stat squish Blizzard has talked about for almost a decade finally happened. The game's numbers are still inflated, but much more manageable than recent expansions. I was also very happy to see that a lot of class abilities have been streamlined or removed from the game completely. Gameplay felt extremely bloated when I quit during Cataclysm. There were just way too many abilities. From what I've seen, this problem only got worse and worse with the next few expansions. It was definitely a good call to trim the game down a bit for BFA, both in terms of stats and class abilities. I'm not a huge fan of how they went about doing this, but I'll get into that later. I've also really enjoyed the dungeons. I'm not much of a dungeon guy, so this kind of surprised me, but they each have a very unique feel, and some of the new mechanics result in pretty cool gameplay. The boss fights are dynamic and challenging enough to be interesting. In my opinion, this is probably the most engaging that 5-man content has ever been. But hands down, the biggest thing that BFA does right is that it nails the concept of giving max level players reasons to travel around the world with no flying mounts. This makes the world feel more alive and exciting than it has in years. The main grind once you hit max level is world quests. These are kind of like dailies, but they pop up randomly around the map on an 8 or 12 hour cycle. Getting these quests done is essential to improving your character by collecting a new resource called Azerite and grinding rep with the new factions. Assuming you're playing with war mode on, you'll have plenty of PvP fights along the way. Blizzard choosing to not allow flying mounts in the new zones, combined with the world quest system, results in the world feeling more dynamic and exciting than it has since TBC. I think the big thing they got right here is that instead of giving us one daily quest hub or trying to force PvP in a specific zone, Blizzard found a way to make PvP happen organically throughout all the new zones. I really have to applaud them for getting that formula right for the first time in 10 years. So yeah, the world quest system and the lack of flying mounts does a fantastic job of making world PvP happen naturally. But this brings me to by far my biggest disappointment with BFA. The world PvP is severely trivialized by quality of life features. There are so many graveyards in the new zones that you're never more than a few hundred yards away from one, and you resurrect with 80% health. Half the time when you kill someone in world PvP, they res and are attacking you again in less than 30 seconds. 1v2 is almost unwinnable because the first player you kill will be alive again before you can kill the second player. On one specific occasion, I actually aggroed a mob while I was finishing off a PvP kill, and the player had already resurrected before I even had time to kill the mob. Group fights quickly turn into Zergfests as players are constantly resurrecting and jumping back into the fight before either side has time to make a complete wipe. This is totally broken and really ruins world PvP. I can't even imagine how awful world boss fights will be with this amount of graveyards in the game. There is also an item with a 5-minute cooldown that lets you summon a Flight Master to come and pick you up. It's a 4-second cast, and once the cast goes off, you can't be killed. So basically, any class with a 4-second CC, aka all of them, can Bubble Hearth. It's absolutely infuriating. This item should have a much longer cooldown and should be much more difficult to... What am I saying? This item should not exist. It's a perfect example of how one quality of life feature can have a severe impact on gameplay. Okay. I hate this game. But wait, let's go over the positives before I get carried away complaining about stuff. The art style is beautiful, the zones are fantastic, the 5-man dungeons are pretty interesting and fairly challenging, the stat squish and the trimming down of classes are overall good things, and I have mixed feelings about World PvP because they totally nailed the formula but then screwed it up with quality of life features. What's unfortunate is that most of these positives are relatively shallow and don't change the core gameplay experience. The excitement of beautiful new zones wears off pretty quickly, and once you've completed a dungeon 3 or 4 times, it becomes a chore no matter how well designed or good looking it is. The stat squish is nice, but has zero impact on gameplay. The stripping down of class abilities does make gameplay a bit less bloated, but it does nothing to combat the homogenization of classes that has been the most glaring problem with WoW's gameplay since Cataclysm. It still feels like every class has an interrupt, a CC, a stun, a self-heal, and a distance closer. There is no sense of class identity. This has been my biggest complaint with modern WoW for many years, and Blizzard doesn't seem to have any interest in changing it. If you're like me and the homogenization of classes is a big reason you quit the game, don't get your hopes up for BFA. While I love the concept of the world quest system, a lot of the quests are painfully boring minigames. I understand that Blizzard's goal here was to break up the monotony of killing and gathering quests, but the minigames fall so short of actually being fun that it totally backfires. These types of quests do nothing but break immersion and prevent you from getting into a good rhythm while playing. One particular quest gave me a gnomish camera and instructed me to take selfies at various points throughout the area. I guess some people might find stuff like this amusing, but I just found it incredibly annoying. The leveling process is filled with quests like this and is also extremely linear. You're forced to do quests in a certain order, and it feels more like a single-player campaign than an MMO. When you reach level 120, things open up a lot, but the game still holds your hand in every way possible. Without a doubt, the most frustrating thing about the post-120 grind is that the game actually limits how much you can progress on a daily and weekly basis. I only have 5 to 6 hours a day of playtime right now, and even I find myself hitting the limits of how much Azerite and rep I can farm each day. This is super annoying and serves no purpose other than closing the gap between casual and hardcore players. The concept of holding the player's hand is extremely prevalent in BFA, and it's going to be a big turnoff for old school players. The most glaring example of this hand-holding is the way that specs themselves work now. Gone are the days of experimenting with hybrid specs or tweaking a few points around your gear or playstyle. You simply select a spec, and the game automatically gives you a set of abilities based on that spec, forcing you into a very specific playstyle. You are told exactly how to use your spec's main abilities effectively and even what order to use them in. Talent points still technically exist, but you only get to choose 7, and most of them don't really change your playstyle or your class at all. The gearing process is equally casual friendly, holding your hand every step of the way and giving you powerful items for doing basically nothing. Dungeons and quests automatically reward you with items appropriate for your class and spec, and there is no need to put thought or effort into min-maxing. 99% of the time, you should just go with whatever has the highest item level. This lack of room for freedom and creativity is noticeable in every aspect of the game, right down to the mechanics themselves. In vanilla, it's a pretty common tactic for rogues to use Distract just as an enemy is about to finish a cast, forcing them to turn around and effectively canceling their cast. This is not something that's explained on the tooltip of Distract, and it definitely was not an intentional game design decision. It's just one of the hundreds of examples of creative uses for abilities in vanilla that players have figured out over the years. When I tried to use this tactic on my rogue in BFA, I was met with the error message that Distract does not affect targets in combat. This is a perfect example of Blizzard simply dumbing down the game. They removed a creative way to use an ability for absolutely no reason, and I just can't understand that philosophy. This hand-holding and removal of room for creativity is so prevalent in BFA that old school players are definitely going to notice it and be turned off by it. Overall, BFA isn't a bad expansion. In fact, it actually takes a lot of steps in the right direction. The issue is that Cataclysm, Mists of Pandaria, Warlords of Draenor, and Legion took so many steps in the wrong direction that the problems they created can never be fixed without completely redesigning the game from the ground up. It's very frustrating because BFA shows a ton of promise but also falls victim to the same bad design decisions that have plagued WoW for over a decade. BFA absolutely nails the formula for great world PvP and then shoots itself in the foot with quality of life features. It gives you a nice, long, juicy grind at max level, but then limits how much you can progress each day. It does a great job of fixing the bloated class mechanics, but does nothing to address class homogenization and the lack of class identity. If you quit for the same reasons I did, the homogenization of classes, the dumbing down of specs and abilities, the removal of creativity and freedom, and the complete absence of social interaction with other players, then I gotta be honest, you're probably going to be disappointed with BFA. I can't tell you not to buy it, because I'm still playing it and genuinely enjoying it. But I'm also in the thick of the honeymoon period, and I'm not sure how much longer I'll be able to look past terrible features like the Flightmaster whistle. If you have some time and money to burn, by all means, give BFA a shot. The world is alive again, and honestly, the game is more fun than it's been in many years. But a lot of the same design decisions that made old school players quit are still there. So if you're on the fence, you're probably better off saving your time and money for Classic. Until next time, I'm OG. Have fun with whatever you guys are playing out there.